Okay, again, I apologize for the delay. I'm going to call the meeting to order. And the first order of business is the approval of the previous audit from May 29th, 2024. So can I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Okay, any additions, comments, questions? If none, I just have one comment. I noticed that in the minutes, it referenced follow-up on an audit. And I don't know if anybody was able to get that material to me.
Regent Wright, we are working on following up on that material, but it may be related to, and I'll ask Michael Moriarty to confirm this, it may be related to the data center controls issue that we'll report on briefly in the meeting. But I don't have a document. I don't know which document is related.
Now, in the minutes, it didn't say a specific document. It just said that by the end of the year, that there would be a report. There would be a subsequent report, an audit report. So if it's not done, if that's not completed yet, I just want to note that I want to make sure that we do get back to reconcile the comment that was made in the minutes.
I don't know that it's been completed. I will follow up with Michael Moriarty this afternoon or after this meeting and report to you by day's end.
Okay, thank you. So, all right. I guess that we've had the discussion, so we can vote. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, any opposed? Well, there are only the two of us on the board. Okay, the next agenda item. Can we make the introductions? Because I know I'm going to ask Lloyd to make those introductions, but I'm very pleased to see that we have a controller who's joined the organization. And I know, Lloyd, that you are very relieved.
I can't tell you how pleased I am, Chair Wright. And thank you for allowing me this pleasure. I am very pleased, Regents, to introduce to you Annette Pavone, who is our new system controller. Annette has been in accounting and been a lead accountant at UConn for over 13 years, and she's also run her own accounting firm before that. We'll talk about some of the challenges we've had with the audit this past year a little bit later in the meeting, but Annette didn't join us until January, so she was in no way associated with the challenges, but we are very, very pleased to have her join our team. So please join me in welcoming our new controller, Annette Pavone.
Welcome, Annette.
Thank you. And just
Welcome,
a small
Annette.
correction, I was actually at UConn for almost 19 years, so.
Oh.
And came from a small public accounting firm before that. So.
Well, I can certainly say that we are delighted that you are joining our organization.
Thank you.
So if I may, Chair Wright, also introduce Cameron Liston, who is CSU's System Chief Compliance Officer. He is a new compliance officer. He's been with us a few months now and already hitting the ground running with regard to some of the new policies that we'll also report on later in the meeting. So please join me in welcoming our new Chief Compliance Officer, Cameron Liston.
Yes, and I've had the pleasure of meeting Cameron, and I'm delighted that he and Karen are working so closely to address some of these issues that introducing new processes and procedures. So.
Thank you. And finally, I will ask CFO Carrie Kelly of CT State to introduce CT State's new compliance officer, Cynthia Isalis. CFO
Good morning,
Carrie.
Regent. Good morning, Regents. I'm Carrie Kelly. I'm proud to let you know that we brought on our inaugural compliance officer last May. That is Cynthia Isalis. She comes to us with a wealth of experience as an attorney. She was formerly in the Office of State Ethics and at various points in time in their legal division. She has also served with the Office of Early Childhood and the State Police as their legal director. So, Cynthia.
Hello, very happy to be here. I will do a further introduction of myself when we get to the CT state compliance segment.
Okay, welcome, Cynthia, and thank you for joining us. Okay, so now we can move to the next agenda item, which are the update on audits of the auditors of public accounts audit report. And Lloyd, I'm going to turn things over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am going to share my screen. You should see a slide that says update of audits by the APA. Do you?
Yes, it's very
Okay.
clear.
Great. So this is where we update those reports that were issued by the state's auditors of the public accounts since our last audit committee meeting. And their last meeting, as you just approved the minutes, were related to May 29th of 2024. 3 reports were issued since that last meeting. Most recently, the report on executive leadership spending on P cards. Back in May, we got a report on the state data center controls. It was related to Charter Oak State College, but the issues that they pointed out are also relevant across the system. And I'll speak to that here in just a minute. And finally, the 3rd report back in July was issued on our banner information systems, particularly related to updating those policies. With regard to the first report, which was issued in January 30th of this year, it was in the news. It was a follow-on to the reports issued by the Office of State Controller, as well as the APA also issued a similar report focused on the P card usage within the Chancellor's office. You see what the findings are. They found, and these were reported in the media, missing or incomplete reconciliations, exceeding limits on meals, missing documentation, and the like. So the recommendations made by both the Office of State Controller as well as the APA was to update our P card policies and procedures and to monitor these procedures and policies regularly to make sure usage is following policy and procedures. And so I am happy to report and will ask for our new compliance officer, Cameron Liston, to provide more detail. I'm happy to report that we have issued or developed a new P card policy that will be discussed and voted on at the next board meeting on February 27th. It was recently passed out of the Finance Committee meeting last Wednesday. Cameron, would you like to speak more to the P card policy?
Yes, absolutely. I appreciate the opportunity, and good morning, Regents, and all who are attending. I'm just going to go really briefly over what the policy is, and I do want to note that the APA's findings were really instrumental in terms of identifying vulnerabilities in our processes around this. The new P card policy is a system-wide policy that establishes responsibilities, limits, and controls that previously were individually managed by institutions. So we have developed a policy that provides us with consistency with how we are using P cards, how we're reviewing the use of P cards, and how we're reconciling the use of our P cards. First and foremost, what the policy does is it establishes both acceptable and unacceptable uses of the P card. It's a very detailed framework that will provide users or cardholders the opportunity to know whether or not how they're using the card is acceptable underneath our procedures. Secondly, it establishes a multi-tiered review process. So we have both at the institution level, regular audits, and then at the system level. This is supported by our transition to the new P card vendor, and it includes a digitization of all of our reconciliation and documents supporting and justifying our use of the P cards. Beyond that, there are no more unilateral exceptions to any of the limits or expectations outlined in the P card. Any exception must be requested prior to the transaction occurring and must have the approval of somebody other than the cardholder who is attempting the transaction. And then finally, the P card policy requires both at the institutional level and at the individual cardholder level, a responsibility that training is completed. So the first training will be rolled out by the system office by the effective date of the policy. It'll focus on largely, acceptable use and unacceptable use, as well as examples on how to appropriately justify and document purchases on the P card. I'm happy to answer your questions if there are any, but that is a very high level picture of what it is. I think it's a great opportunity for us to unify how we are approaching our P cards. And I should note, I know there have been discussions about the number of P cards. This was a highlight of the report as well. The policy itself does include a mandate to limit the use or the number of P cards issued to a specific criteria of eligibility.
So Cameron, you talked about the training. There'll be required training for, I'm assuming, all users of the P cards and those who are the approvers of the P cards. When does, and if you said that, I apologize, when does the training start, and how do we ensure that the training is pushed through the organization?
Yeah, so as soon as the policy is adopted by the Board of Regents, it'll go back to the policy committee, which was recently established. One of the key aspects of the policy committee is that it has to develop a strategy for communicating policy updates. So the system office is going to develop a training that will be available on demand. And this will just be the initial training because we're working in a tight window here of an April 1st effective date. The initial kind of wave of communication around that will be ensuring that all cardholders who are active currently receive a copy of the procedure or the policy as adopted by the Board of Regents. The second will be an on-demand training that will highlight what I was talking about with the acceptable uses, unacceptable uses, and how to justify purchases on the P card. I do foresee there being additional trainings coming out after institutions adopt their procedures. So given the structure of our individual institutions, the procedures themselves will have some flexibility. Of course, they all must be consistent with the policy, but the on the grounds, who is the reviewing party, who's the one that's conducting these audits will look different just because of structural differences at the institutions. And so we will offer both. Institutions can develop that training themselves, or they can make a request to the system office for help in developing those trainings. And those will roll out as those procedures become published.
Okay. Regent Porth, do you have any questions or comments?
I do. Thanks, Elise. I have a few, actually. Some related to what has already been discussed with Cameron. One thing I need to say right from the outset is that this issue with the P cards, I feel as a member of the Board of Regents that we have a fiduciary responsibility and an oversight responsibility. And this is a topic, as far as I know, that we weren't aware of beforehand. How can we have a process or an approach to this that would allow at least this committee on behalf of the board to be knowledgeable beforehand of issues like this so that we can exercise our fiduciary responsibility? I just want to say one more thing, Elise and Lloyd. I really respect the separation of duties between the board and the leadership, starting with the chancellor. And I don't want to get into a situation where the board is looking over the shoulder of our leaders, our system leaders, on issues like this. At the same time, this whole experience requires, I think, that the board become more engaged or more aware sooner about issues like this. And I am completely open to possible ways to do that without crossing over the line of that important separation between the board's role and the system leadership role. I do have two other questions, but I'll stop there.
Yeah,
Can I just add to that? It's and I agree with that. There needs to be a separation, but there also needs to be assurances that the governance committee is kept is kept informed, that we are in fact, that the system, the policies and the practices of the systems are consistent with the practices, I should say, should be consistent with the policies. And I think, sort of from my perspective, that the governance committee was not, some of that has to do with not being, us not having the regular audits, internal audits of what was going on. So it's, I know this is a big question, and what Regent Porth said is very, very important. But I think going forward, and if we can't do it today, that sort of at a subsequent meeting, we should have part of the new practice, not only as it applies to P cards, is how we're going to ensure that practices within the system are consistent with the policies, that the governance committee is kept abreast of any internal audits that are going on, consistent with the charter. So it's a big question, and I know that, sort of, Cameron, that I know you're looking at all of that. I just think that for the record, we need to make sure that all of those issues are addressed, and as we move forward, that we have scheduled review of these policies and practices.
Yes, I absolutely agree.
Yes.
And if I may, the policy itself considers that in three different ways. I'll say that the first and clearest way is it clearly highlights, and I believe this has always been the case, but it says it in the plain language of the policy that anytime there's a violation, it must be reported to the cardholder and the supervisor. So in the case of the chancellor, that is the Board of Regents. So any time an audit reveals card or somebody with lack of documentation, it will be reported directly. The second is the established audits, internal reviews and audits will be available. The Finance Committee asked similarly for regular updates on this, and we are committed to providing those updates. And then the last piece of it is, and I feel like I lost my train of thought there for a second. There is a third piece. I apologize. The third piece is that the regular audits will all be published. So you'll know the dates and times when those are occurring. And that information is something that I believe that you as the Board of Regents has access to and can request at any time.
Well, and I realize we have access to it, but I want to make sure that as a part of this committee, and I don't, whether it's this committee and finance, but certainly for the governance committee, that we have a regular report out to be consistent with the charter for the governance committee.
Absolutely.
I mean, for the audit, I'm sorry, for the audit committee.
Elise, I agree with everything you said, and I appreciate Cameron's response. We obviously, that's part of our responsibility, part of our duty, and I hope we can work out a process and a practice that allows for the appropriate separation of powers, but still enables us as board members to do our job as for fiduciary oversight. May I ask two more questions, please?
Absolutely.
One has to do with this new policy, which we'll review on Thursday. And I'm excited about that too. This will be good, I think. How does it compare to the policy that exists for the state government?
Our policy is far stricter in terms of the number of items that we are restricting, saying are unacceptable uses, and how we're defining what acceptable uses are. Secondly, with the multi-tiered review process and reconciliation, we go far beyond the state policy for P cards.
Okay, that's good to hear too. And my last question, you've already discussed somewhat in response to one of Elise's questions, but how many P cards are there in our system at this point? And this might be Lloyd's question to answer, or someone, maybe the board's. How many should there be?
I believe General Counsel Karen Bufkin has the answer to that question, Regent Porth?
Yes,
Pam?
we have currently about under 1,000 P cards. We have reduced somewhere between 18 and 20% with the rollout of the new P card vendor, and that's just the first cut. You'll notice in this policy, it requires individuals or the individual institutions to look at the number of P card holders and actively work to reduce those. So we have reduced almost 20% since the end of last year to the current date, and that number will continue to go down.
Okay, thank you for that information. I'll just say this, and maybe I shouldn't without a more careful consideration of all the details related to this, but 900 sounds like a lot to me, even in a system of our size. And any appropriate reduction in the number of cards in the system, it seems like a prudent thing for us to be working toward. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Madam Chair, I believe the Chancellor has his hand up.
Okay, I can't see that, so, okay. Chancellor?
Oh. Looks like that was, I think he lowered it, so.
Sorry. I was on mute. I still haven't learned how to go do a virtual meeting in 5 years. I appreciate the time of the committee as always, number one. Number two, I want to say that Cameron Liston, Karen Buffkin, and the whole team have done a really remarkable job with, bringing our policy up to the next level where it should be, right? Not just given recent events, but just in general. I think that this is a massive step forward, and as Cameron noted, clearly with my support and our entire administration's support, our policy is stricter than the state policy, and no one is exempt from that, myself or anyone else. And so, related to what you were noting, Regent Porth and Regent Wright, about what needs to be done, when and how, I would recommend that General Counsel and our acting board secretary and our compliance officer and anyone else from the team sit with the audit committee and every committee to review every committee's charter. If we look at the charter of the audit committee, it says very clearly that this committee is responsible for conducting a review of the president's spending. And I can tell you that never happened under my over 3.5 years. And this was brought up by the auditors of public accounts in the hearing that was had earlier this month on this issue, and that they noted that they could not ascertain any evidence that a review of this kind had happened for any system chancellor or president dating back for maybe 10 years. And General Counsel Buffkin can maybe correct me on that if I'm wrong. And clearly that's something that we want to tighten up. And obviously I am 100% for that. And so I do think that ultimately this kind of establishing a baseline, our system office needs to support our committees and our committee members and chairs so that there is a distinct kind of timeline, calendar, and script of what should happen with each committee to help those committees and your time to be as efficient and as effective as possible. And that historically has just not been the case with our system. So we vow to do better. So thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Okay, thank you. I just want to add to this, and again, I don't know if it's appropriate to talk at this committee meeting or at a subsequent committee meeting. I know one of the items that the state auditors identified was there seemed to be some confusion about the, internal audit. There had been some done, but it hadn't been done regularly. And so I think at some point, I think it would be prudent for an update to the committee on how we're going to address that.
I can speak partly to that, Madam Chair. This is Karen Buchan.
Okay, Karen, I'm sorry. I have little boxes on the top of my screen, so it's sometimes difficult. So I appreciate that. So Karen, yes, if you can speak to that, that would be helpful.
Yes, we are currently putting together information for the audit committee so that those reviews can recommence and, you know, examining the charter and making sure that we are in compliance going forward.
Okay, thank you. So that would be at an upcoming meeting. Okay, thank you.
And that would be for calendar year 24.
Okay. Any other questions or comments on this subject? Okay, there being no other questions, I think we can go to the next section. I'm going to turn it over to Lloyd for the report by management. Oh, no, this is related to the year-end discussions, and then beginning with the year-end, the report by management, and then we'll go to Claire to Grant Thornton for their report. So I'll turn it over to you, Lloyd.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll complete the initial report of the audits, the update on the audits by the APA, and then I'll move directly into the report by management. We just discussed the executive leadership spending that you see on your screen. The next two items are the state data center controls for Charter Oak, though they apply across the system. And the last one is the banner information systems. These are more minor issues that are sort of ongoing audits of the APA. The four areas that were the areas of focus for APA's risk assessment were the maintenance of the IT environment, IT personnel, security controls, and disaster planning for IT systems. The first three of those areas were deemed a low risk by the APA, but it was the disaster planning for IT systems that the APA deemed a high risk. So the APA recommended that we develop policies that include comprehensive risk assessments and disaster recovery plans. And I will say that our CIO, our new CIO, is certainly hard at work updating all IT policies across the system, working closely with the BOR Tech Committee Chair. The final item related to banner information systems, that APA report was issued in July of 24. It basically argued that the system needs to update its information security policies regularly. Even if we have no substantive update, we need to sort of demonstrate or document that that update has been made and reflected in the documentation. So they're suggesting that we strengthen our internal controls to make sure that our IT policies are updated. Again, even if there are no substantive changes to the policy, they simply want to see documentation that we have reviewed and updated, if necessary, the IT policies for the banner information systems. So I'm happy to take any questions on those last two items.
The recommendation came out, if I'm reading this correctly, the recommendation came out last year in July?
The recommendations come with the report.
It comes with the report, okay.
That's correct.
So then we're still working on that in terms of the two issues, the high risk disaster plan for IT, we're working on that now, and then update information security policies. Those are the things that we're working on.
That's
Do we
correct.
have a
That's
targeted, do we have a targeted date for completion?
I do not have a targeted date for completion, but I will ask Michael Mundrain, our CIO, if he does. Michael?
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Chair. I can speak more to one than the other. I will speak to the second one first. We are about to promulgate a new IT security policy to key stakeholders this week. This is independent. I was not actually aware that this report came out back in July. I wasn't here for that, and I wasn't aware of this. But when I got here, I had feedback from the board itself that indicated that that policy was not well liked. And so I've been working with the CIOs across the system to develop a new policy. Obviously, this policy requires broad promulgation and feedback before it gets implemented, but we wanted to get it into a relatively good form before we started putting it out in the community for communication, and that should start this week. Regarding the disaster recovery, I was not aware that this was, but this is a conversation that I've been having with the CIOs. I will pursue a position on disaster recovery. I will put this on my to-do list, and I would be happy to provide an update at the next audit meeting.
Okay.
I believe there's some inputs that might be helpful from the Charter Oak CFO, Michael Moriarty.
Morning, everyone. Yeah, I can give a brief update on the disaster recovery. So just speaking about the comments about the comments in the minutes were related to this report, where we knew this report was incoming. We had been working with the APA on it. And so that was just the formality of acknowledging this report would be out. Much like any APA report, the response actually comes when the report is released. There's no secondary report which is submitted. It's just continuous improvement and continuous mitigation. Specific to disaster recovery, the timing of the audit, we were actually in the process of closing down our data center and moving to a new data center, which is a shared resource with the state and one of the state universities, which I'm very, very grateful for. It's very efficient. It actually elevates our level of security. So when this audit was done, we did not have that migration fully complete, and we have wrapped up documentation on that. And I'll even go as far as to say that the CIO group working together, Central will be hosting a disaster recovery session for all of us in March, which is fantastic. And so this is once again something of continual improvement and continual monitoring. It's not something that's a one and done effort. And I will just close by saying I echo Michael's focus on the security policy for all of us, and he's done a good job of laying out his plans to ensure there's appropriate stakeholder input on that. So thank you.
Michael, thank you for your comments. Now I understand better that it's a sort of work in progress. It's helpful. In reading the minutes, it sounded like there was a report that was going to be produced that would address all of the issues that had been identified in the audit. So this is helpful. But I'm looking forward to hearing about at the next audit committee meeting, hearing about sort of the progress we're making. Regent Porth, any questions?
Yeah, thanks. Real quick. I know that Regent Yang, Ted Yang, is working with a committee that the charge is at least related to this discussion, and I think they've made some good progress. We got a report at the last Regents meeting. The only thing I'll say is that there's a lot at stake in this disaster recovery planning and preventing system breaches, especially not only with regard to the business of the CSCU system, but also with regard to online instruction, more and more so. And I think this is one we need to keep a close eye on, and one that I hope that I heard what you said, Michael. This is an iterative process, but we should move as quickly as we can to protect ourselves, to make sure we're as secure as we can be, and that we have a good disaster recovery plan. Thanks, Elise. That's all.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Lloyd, is there anything else?
No, I think we are ready for the management report of the year-end audit. So I will share my screen again. You should see management report on your screen.
Yes.
And so this is sort of my chance to offer a view on what you will hear from our independent auditor, Claire Eston, who has worked with us for a few years. We're very pleased with our relationship with Grant Thornton. She'll report on the findings of the audit of our financial statements. What you will hear from our partner is that in terms of the risk areas, there were no exceptions except for in one area, and that was in the capitalized interest calculation and reporting in our university financial statements. She'll address that in a little more detail. She will also report that there were some misstatements that were identified. At least one of those misstatements was corrected. That's the misstatement associated with the accounting for the new fringe benefit allocation law. I've mentioned to the chair before and others in the meeting that the new state law on how fringe benefit allocations between the state and the constituent units of public higher ed, that law changed how that would be done. And so the accounting for how that would be done was quite uncertain for us, and led to my decision to take a certain approach that was wrong. And we corrected that error by reversing the fringe expense and appropriation revenue postings. The reversal has no impact on our change in net position, but it was a misstatement nonetheless, and Claire will speak to the implications of that misstatement. The other misstatement was on the fringe benefit accruals, which was a smaller matter. No correction was made, largely because those misstatements were immaterial. In general, you will hear that difficulties were encountered in this particular audit, and they were basically because we had major delays, partly because of our staffing, partly because of the items that I just mentioned, and partly because of the lack of a system controller. You may remember Melinda Curanes was our controller who left back in August, the absolute difficult time for her to leave. And we weren't able to fill that position until January with Annette Pavone. As you know, Madam Chair, we saw two delays in this meeting. These delays are related to the challenges we had in completing our statements. The primary reason is the confluence of two major events that simultaneously changed financial management practice in FY24. The first event was the official merger of the 12 state community colleges into a single organization, now Connecticut State Community College. The second event was the passage of the new law I just mentioned that changed the employee retirement benefit allocations between the state and the constituent units of higher education. The first event forced technology changes to the enterprise resource management environment that first was fitted to 12 organizations. The change moved it to fit one organization. And in the transition, critical customized reporting was lost. And so it was the workarounds that we had to undertake because of those lost customized reports that led to a delay in our work completing the statements. The second event forced an uncertain change in how to account for the employee retirement benefit allocations. The uncertainty led to my decision to continue accounting for these benefits as payments on behalf of CSU institutions, consistent with GASB 24. And then we had an auditor ruling that changed as a result of the new law, which meant that they no longer believe that the payments on behalf of, or rather, they no longer believe that GASB 24 was applicable, given the change in the new law. And then, of course, because of that, we reversed all of the retirement benefit postings based on the auditor's ruling. So these events combined with critical staff turnover, mainly with our controller, that led to an extraordinary effort to complete the financial statements this year. We do not expect those two major issues, the new law and the change in the organization of CT State, to happen again. So we do not expect to face that challenge. However, I would like to speak with the board as well as the chancellor on how we remediate some of the staff challenges that I've mentioned. In fact, I will recommend to the board and to the chancellor that we hire 2 additional accountants, senior accountants, so that we don't run into such delays going forward.
Okay.
I'm happy to answer questions, but I would recommend that we hear from our accounting partner, Claire Eston, and then have a larger discussion about the challenges, if that's okay with you, Chair Wright.
I just want to make sure I saw Regent Porth's hand up and it's down now. Are we good?
We are for the time being. I do have a question related to the final result of the whole back and forth on how fringe benefits are paid for, but I can wait.
Well,
Okay.
I have a statement and I just want to make it, I don't expect it to be answered right now, but I just want to make sure that when Claire from Grant Thornton comes on, it's addressed. And the question that I have, because we've been dealing with the fringe benefit issue for at least since I've been on the board for several years. The question I have is, and if Claire could address this, when there is a new law, fringe benefit law, is there any guidance given to the those organizations that are affected by it? So I don't expect that question now. I'm assuming that as Claire goes through the overview, perhaps we can have that question answered. Okay, and so are we turning things over to Claire Eston now?
We are now ready to hear from our independent auditor and Grant Thornton's managing partner, Claire Eston. Claire?
Good morning. Thank you for having us today. So I appreciate the question, Chair Wright, and we'll be sure to address that. And Lloyd, I appreciate the context that you provided with respect to the results of the audit and the challenges that we collectively faced in order to get to where we are today, which is that we are done with the university's audit. We're done with the audit of Charter Oak State College. For the CT State audit, we still have a couple of wrap-up items, which I'll go through that. But I also wanted to just state at the outset that we will be reporting issues associated with the audits, and we'll go into those in some depth today. However, the opinion on the financial statements or opinions on the 3 sets of financial statements are still considered what we would refer to as unmodified or clean opinions. They're not going to be qualified in any way. So I just wanted to let everybody know, in case there was any question, these are still unmodified opinions. Regent Porth, do you have a question?
I'm sorry. I should put my hand down. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. So I'll share my screen and we can go through the results. And I'm not planning on covering every slide. Oh, wait a minute. Did I share my screen? Sorry. I apologize. It doesn't seem to be working. Sorry. Here we go. Are you seeing my screen now? It's a purple slide.
No, we're not.
You're not.
Now we are.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you. Sorry about that. So I will go through what I would refer to as the more salient points. There's a full slide deck with all of the required communications, but I'll cover the things that I think are most important. And I think Lloyd Lloyd summarized it, but just to re-summarize the things that we're going to talk about, there was an audit adjustment that Grant Thornton identified during the audit related to the FY24 financial statements to reverse the accounting for the state appropriation revenue and the related and offsetting fringe expense in the universities and CT State draft financial statements. Actually, Charter Oak had correctly recorded it. And then separately, there was a management adjustment related to the FY23 financial statements to reverse the accounting for the change in fringe. That was the accrual accounting that Lloyd had mentioned. Whenever there's an audit adjustment, we do have to evaluate whether there's a related internal control breakdown in financial reporting. And so we are reporting a material weakness associated with the audit adjustment that I mentioned, the first item that I mentioned, and we'll go into that in more detail. We will also be including what's referred to as an emphasis of a matter, in our opinion, on the financial statements. This, again, going back to my previous comment, that doesn't mean it's unmodified. It's still an unmodified opinion. This is just an emphasis to say that because of the significance of the change in the fringe accounting, regarding comparability of the financials, the FY24 financial statements to the prior year financial statements. It's quite a big swing in particularly what's reported as fringe expense and what's being reported as state appropriation revenue. So the emphasis of a matter just calls that out. Again, it doesn't qualify our opinion, but we, excuse me, we are required to communicate that. We will discuss the significant difficulties encountered during the audit. And then finally, again, as Lloyd mentioned, the adjustment to capitalized interest. It's just a footnote disclosure. You correctly accounted for it. It's just the way that it's presented in the disclosure for the universities. So with that said, just going through the slides, we are, like I said before, we're ready to issue our report, assuming approval from audit committee today. We'll be ready to issue our reports on the universities and Charter Oak either today or tomorrow. And then the CT State financial statements, I know I wanted to acknowledge we just got an updated draft of the CT State financial statements this morning. So we are going to be finishing our financial statement tie out and final procedures on the CT State audit this week. And regarding other results, you know, we executed our audit in accordance with the plan that we discussed with the audit committee back in, I believe it was June, with no major deviations except for the items that we'll be discussing. So around the significant risks and other areas of focus, whether it's tuition, grant revenue, cap assets, et cetera, we'll kind of only talk about the exceptions. So I have three of my colleagues here with me, Chris, Dave, and Will. So each of them are going to be speaking briefly about various adjustments that I had mentioned at a high level. So Chris, I believe you're covering this first item.
Yep. Thanks, Claire. So during the audit, we identified that the accounting change for fringe payments made by the state was not reflected correctly for CSU and CT State. Charter Oak accounted for the change correctly. And for CSU and CT State, this resulted in the adjusting entry shown on this slide. The portion of those fringe payments, the adjustment was to reverse that out of state appropriations revenue and fringe benefits expense, as well as the related accrued and due from state amounts at year end. The adjustment, it's just a gross up on the balance sheet and also the P&L, and does not have any impact on the change in net position. So I'll pause there in case there's any other questions on that adjustment. Okay, then can turn it over to Dave. Yeah.
Yeah, before Dave, just to call out that it was just universities and CT State. It was correctly recorded at Charter Oak. Sorry, go ahead, Steve, or Dave, sorry.
Thank you, Claire. As we mentioned previously, there was another misstatement that was identified. This time, this was identified by management related to the fringe benefit payments from the state. This was uncorrected, as Lloyd indicated. It was deemed to be immaterial. It was due to the accrual made in FY23, which, because presented single-year financials, it doesn't show up on the financial statements, but this amount is included with the MD&A to be comparable. So as you can see, this impacted all 3 of our audits for CSU, CT State, and Charter Oak. Like we said, it was deemed immaterial, so this is included in the management representation letter, and it's communicated to the Board of Regents, but is not a material misstatement for our audit.
I have a question, and I don't know if this may be a question directed to Lloyd as opposed to Grant Thornton. Why is it that it was captured correctly by Charter Oak, but not sort of, we're all in, this is a system. So within the system, Charter Oak did it one way, and the state universities and Connecticut State did it another way. What?
Well, I believe that that's related to the previous slide, not this one here. So if you could go back to that slide. Yeah, this is the, so I made a decision, Regent Wright, that we were going to maintain status quo in how we account for fringe benefits, which is to say, I made a decision to continue to follow GASB 24. GASB 24 claiming that we would need to account for fringe payments as payments on behalf of our institutions. When I made that decision, I believe Charter Oak, having a controller that understands the deep technical aspects of GASB 24, decided to go another way. And it was soon thereafter that I learned from Grant Thornton that we should have done the similar thing with CSUs and CT State. And as soon as we learned that, we reversed our action to reverse those postings.
Okay.
So actually, it was Charter Oak that helped us understand the error of our ways, and Grant Thornton confirmed that.
Okay, this may be a discussion for another time. I'm still trying to reconcile how within a system you had, 3 different entities, well, at least one entity who did it one way and then 2 others doing it another way. So I don't want to distract from the report from Grant Thornton, but it's just, maybe I'm thinking about this incorrectly, but I'm just would at some point like to understand that as we handle, financial statements, is it typical to have sort of, to not reconcile sort of the way different institutions within the system handle financial statements? So I don't.
So
go ahead.
I think you're absolutely right. And I certainly struggled with what I could have done differently. And it seems to me that the gap that led to this sort of differences in approach was because we didn't make the decision together. And so I think the solution to that particular gap is to develop an audit governance group from among our CFOs and our controllers so that such deviations don't occur going forward. Or that if one entity chooses or makes the case for the correct approach, we have the opportunity to have that discussion internally and then all move together with a correct decision. So I will take responsibility for that gap and use and think about building this governance structure that will correct it going forward.
Okay, thank you.
Claire,
And
you want to
maybe-
continue?
Sure, thank you, Lloyd. And Chair Wright wanted to also address your question about when there's changes in state laws that have an impact on the financial statements. You had asked whether there's guidance available. To my knowledge, I would say I think it depends based on working with the the system for several years now. I've seen in some cases where the state comptroller's office will provide guidance on how to apply accounting changes to the financial statements of the relevant reporting entities, whether it's CT State, any other agencies. I've seen in the past where they will provide, I'll call it a memo or some instructions about, for example, we all have to adopt the new lease accounting standard under GASB 87. Here's how to approach that. In the case of this change in the state law, I don't believe there was specific guidance coming from the state comptroller's office regarding the application of this to the institutions of public higher education. So I would say it varies.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So in terms of other required communications, this slide is what I would refer to as a laundry list of other items that are required to be communicated, and we will address those things that are relevant to the audit this year. We did, as you can see, and as demonstrated by the fact that it's February 24th, and we're usually issuing our audit reports in December, we did have difficulties that were encountered during the 3 audits for a variety of reasons. I would say the fringe accounting was one reason. I think we also actually had challenges with getting through the confirmation process around cash balances with the state comptroller's office. I think it would be helpful for management to do an their own confirmation process with the state comptroller's office around cash balances before they close their books, so that when we do our independent confirmation, it will be a much smoother process. Regarding the emphasis of a matter, I mentioned it briefly. I just wanted to show the committee, the members of the audit committee, what the actual language is. So this is an example of our report, and this is on the Connecticut State Community Colleges. So this is a draft, it's not final, but you'll see this is as we issue every year. We talk about, in our opinion, the financial statements and the changes in cash flows, et cetera, are not materially misstated. And then we go through our basis of opinion. We talk about the responsibilities of management. We talk about our responsibilities. This is all standard language and exactly the same as it was last year. And then there is a section referred to as emphasis of a matter. We every year have an emphasis of a matter on the fact that these financial statements don't present the financial position of the state of Connecticut. That's kind of a standard emphasis of a matter that you include when you're part of these financial statements are included in the ACFR of the state of Connecticut, as you know. But then the new item is what's highlighted in yellow here to say there was a change in accounting method. The entity elected to change its method for fringe benefit or for fringe expenses and the related state appropriation. Our opinion is not modified with respect to this matter. So that's the emphasis of a matter paragraph that I'm referring to.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I'm going to have Will talk a little bit about some of the accounting practices.
Perfect. Thanks, Claire. So for the key accounting practices this year, the first piece we discuss is just any new accounting policies that occurred during the year. For our audit, there is nothing outside of the fringe benefit piece that we've been discussing earlier. So nothing new besides that would have come up in our audit. On the accounting estimates piece, what we do for the listed estimates here is just review and try to determine if there's any management bias that may arise in our testing. And similar to prior years, we found nothing here. So everything's consistent and ended up clean for our audit. The last piece is the disclosure piece, and I know Claire and Lloyd discussed it a little bit earlier. What it is we discovered capitalized interest within the process portion of footnote 5. That balance was $16.7 million. it doesn't impact total net PPE or the net position on the face of the financials. It's really just a disclosure only item. So because of that, we waived on requiring a booked adjustment to the disclosures, and then management will reevaluate it next year and potentially change it. But like I said, it was only a $16.7 million balance reported in SIP, and it should have been reported in buildings and building improvements. So only a footnote 5 impacts.
Thank you, Will. Regarding internal controls, I previewed and again, so did Lloyd, that we are reporting a material weakness. We provided the definitions for a material weakness. It's deficiency in internal control that's such that there's a reasonable possibility that there's a material misstatement of the company's financial statements that wouldn't be prevented or detected on a timely basis. Because of the magnitude of the adjustment for universities and CT State, around the reversal of the state appropriation revenue and the related fringe expense, had that not been identified during the audit and adjusted by management, the financial statements would have been materially misstated. So that's why we classify it as a material weakness. We provided a write-up of what we think the underlying root cause. I think, we tried to summarize it succinctly. I think there's a lot of elements to it. I think Lloyd did a good job of also articulating some of the elements of what you might refer to as the perfect storm of why this happened this year. I echo Lloyd's excitement of having Annette here as to step in as the system controller. I think that will be a great step in the right direction, as well as just better communication around changes in accounting pronouncements. The remaining disclosures are, I would say, fairly perfunctory. We do, each of the universities and community colleges has a related foundation that is included in the financial statements of the respective entities. Grant Thornton doesn't audit those foundations, so we rely on the audits of other auditors for those. We also rely on the audit by the state APA related to the pension and other post-employment benefits. That's no different than in prior years. We do other information that's included is, in this case, it's the management discussion and analysis, which is unaudited, but we do take a look at it and review it for consistency. We are required to report our independence every year. We are performing no non-audit services. We are comfortable with our independence from the organization. This is also another independence disclosure. I don't think anything that needs to be covered specifically. And then in the appendix to the materials are the 3 draft management representation letters, which will be executed when we're ready to issue our report today, tomorrow, for universities in Charter Oak, and then hopefully by Friday for CT State. So any questions on the slides before I take the screen down?
I have a question, Elise.
Oh, please.
Just real quick, the past couple of years during this report, I was gratified to hear that it was a good working relationship between our system leadership and our auditors. Is that the case again this year?
I would say it's a good working relationship in that we are all working towards the same common goal of getting through the audits, and management has been extremely cooperative with all of our requests. I think it's just been a challenge because of the reasons already articulated.
Right. I appreciate that. That's actually why I asked. Thank you.
So you're saying it's not because of the delays was not because of lack of cooperation?
Not in the least.
Yeah.
I would say the opposite. They were bending over backwards to get us the information. It took more time than typical.
Thank you. Good to hear.
Okay, if there are no other questions, Lloyd?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Elise, for your report, excuse me, Claire, for your report. Next on our agenda is a discussion by Nick Dietz, who is with Whittlesey, an accounting firm here in Hartford, who will discuss the CSCU 2020 Construction Expenditure Audit Report. Nick, are you on the call?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Lloyd. I'll also introduce Sean Sheridan, who is the partner on the engagement for Whittlesey. He'll begin with a brief overview, and then I'll jump in on a few matters.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Yeah, good morning, everyone. Real quick, I just kind of wanted to go over the basics of our report. Again, like Grant Thornton, our report is also unmodified, a clean opinion we're going to be issuing. When you look at our report, I just want to kind of point out a couple things that are not normal on reports. Nick, if you'll scroll down a little bit. First off, the basis for accounting on this engagement is cash basis, so it's not GAAP. That being said, that's what's been done in the past years. The next thing I want to point out is we also have an emphasis of matter, and this is related to, we just took over as current auditors this year, so Cohen-Resnick was performing the audit in the past, so we just noted it here. I would like to report that our discussion with Cohen-Resnick went smooth. The transition from them to us, I believe, went smooth, and we had no issues with obtaining audit information from them, so we'll be relying on their past audits for this report. And then as far as our required communications, I just wanted to point out there were no changes in accounting practices from what we took over from Cohen. We encountered no difficulties during the audit. We actually had no audit adjustments, so the numbers on our report or the numbers were provided by management. And then we had no disagreements with management as well. Nick, did you want to go into some of the numbers and describe some of the audit procedures?
Yeah, sure. So just moving down, here's the full schedule of the CSCU 2020 construction expenditures for the year ending June 30th, 2024. The schedule in its form and content is identical to how it was presented in the past, with just the updates for current year amounts. So the initial column is the approved budget as of June 30th, 2024, which there were no changes from the past. We have our column for expenditures paid in the year ended June 30th, 2024. These total expenditures of $29.6 million was what we audited during the year. We performed various procedures such as reconciling the ledgers of expenditures between the individual colleges and universities to the systems office ledgers and make sure that those are all in agreement. We perform sampling over the expenditures to do detailed testing to reconcile recorded expenditures to invoices. We perform some walkthroughs over procedures in recording the expenditures. And as Sean had mentioned, we had no adjustments. So the numbers that were presented to us for total expenditures is what ended up being put into the schedule for our final report. And then the last few columns are just the roll up of expenditures occurring prior to the year we're auditing. And then we have a total column for all of the expenditures through June 30th, 2024. And as Sean mentioned, there were no other issues to report. The only other items in the actual audited financial statements themselves are the notes, which did not change in form or content from prior years. So what you would read through here is basically identical to what the disclosures were in the past, just the required disclosures over any estimates, how the expenditures are being recorded, the fact that it's a cash basis and not GAAP, and then just some detail on the columns that are reported in the schedule, and just a note that there were no subsequent events from the end of the year that was audited through the date of the report. So everything, as you read through this, would be very comparable to what you had seen in the past.
And I just want to state that we're ready to issue as soon as we receive the management representation letters as well. Does anyone have any questions?
I don't have any questions. Regent Forth?
No, I'll just say this, that this audit again demonstrates that we're using the capital funds that we receive in a responsible way. I hope that, I know this isn't a topic for this meeting, but I hope that there could be more discussion with our state partners on how quickly money can be drawn down and invested in the CSCU system. Thanks.
Okay. If there are no other questions, then we can move on to the Connecticut State update.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Whittlesey, for your report as well. The CT State compliance update will be provided by the new CT State compliance officer, Cynthia Isalis. Cynthia?
Hello, good morning. I'm going
Good
to share
morning.
my screen. See. It says I cannot share content. Let's see. I am at our Willimantic office for our HSI event. So I am on my colleague's computer.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
And that is probably the reason it won't let me it won't allow me to make you a presenter.
Gotcha.
Rachel, do you have a copy of the slide deck?
I do. Let me pull it up. It'll just be one moment.
Hold on, please.
While she's pulling that up, I'll just get started and further introduce myself. So my name is Cynthia Salas. I have been with the state of Connecticut for close to 20 years now, very close, in fact. I started off my career with the Office of State Ethics as an ethics attorney. I was there for about 10 years. I worked in both their legal and enforcement divisions. I had the honor and the privilege of arguing their first appeal to the Connecticut Supreme Court successfully, I might add. Following that, I went over to the Office of Early Childhood. Very nice to see you, Regent Porth. I don't know if you remember me from the early childhood days. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then following that, I went over to the Department of Emergency Services and Public Protection, where I spent the last 5 years. This has been a very nice transition because I feel like I'm going back to my roots as a watchdog in the ethics world. So very nice transition. And the fact that I love to share about myself, especially when I go out to the campuses and I speak with the faculty, is I am a CT State parent. My son has taken classes at Tunx's, at Manchester, at Northwestern. So we live CT State in my household day in and day out. Any progress with the...
We've got some presenter limitations, so Rachel is sending the file to me, and
Gotcha.
And I do have presenter rights, so I'll
Gotcha.
get it up as soon as we get it. Okay, so
Great.
please continue your introduction.
Great. So that was my introduction of myself. I wanted to introduce our team. We have at CT State, we have a coordinated compliance committee, which is made up of our VP of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, our Director of Equity and Civil Rights, our Chief of Police, one of our Associate Deans of Student Affairs, our Associate Vice President for Financial Aid and Title IV Compliance, our Director of Mental Health and Wellness, and our VP of Human Resources. As I read more about the world of compliance, I also realize that we need faculty representation on our committee. And so that's something that I'm going to be working on over the next few months. Insofar as the compliance office at CT State, it's myself. We are in the process of hiring a compliance specialist, and that position was just posted on Friday. So we're looking forward to filling that role. I wanted to, oh, go ahead.
So Cynthia, we are ready.
Oh, perfect, perfect. I'm already on slide 3.
Okay.
So I wanted to talk to you about some of the areas of risk that I've seen in the last 9 months. I've been here since May of last year, and some of the things that I've seen, number one by far is protecting our information and data. And I think this is true not just at CT State, this is true across different industries where there are concerns about data breaches. So at CT State and CSU, we have a data breach group. And so I'm a part of that group. We also have our information security program office. We have our data privacy office. We have representation from the general counsel's office. And we all meet when there is a data breach incident. Unfortunately, we meet more often than we'd like because it's something that happens. I was happy to hear CFO Blanchard mention that there's going to be updates to some policies because I think that will help us in that regard. Another area of risk is we have some outdated Board of Trustees policies. We have the Board of Trustees 2011 policy manual. I've already spoken with Cameron about this. As part of the policy work, we will be revisiting some of those outdated policies. Another area of risk is policies not being followed. And this is something that really concerns me in the world of compliance. It is worse to have a policy and not follow it than it is to not have a policy at all. We have this happen in a couple of different areas that I've been able to identify, and I am speaking directly with the stakeholders to ensure that this doesn't happen going forward. The last area of risk that I wanted to identify is we have a lot of minors on campus. So as you know, CT State, we have the 12 campuses, we have a lot of different locations, and we have dual enrollment, we have childcare at a lot of our facilities. And so, you know, I have the concern in mind about those minors being on campus. We have at CT State, we have a sex offender registry council. I'm actually a part of that council. And so we think about, we are an open enrollment college. Everybody gets in, including people who may be on the sex offender registry. And so what we find at times is that people on the sex offender registry have conditions of probation or parole to say that they cannot be around minors. And so, you know, the council reviews those cases. The council makes determinations on a case-by-case basis to determine whether that individual should be allowed on a particular campus or not. I have spoken with my counterpart at Montgomery College in Maryland, and what she tells me is that they have a protection of minors policy. And they actually also have an employee dedicated to protecting minors. So that is something that we may want to consider for CT State in the future. You can,
Cynthia?
Yes.
Cynthia, this is Elise. And I appreciate that you've reached out to other institutions to find out how they've addressed this issue. I actually just want to, just an understanding of one of the other areas of risk that you mentioned, outdated Board of Trustees policies. What are the Board of Trustees policies? Because the only time I remember Board of Trustees was when the organization was very different and it wasn't a consolidated, it wasn't in a system.
Right. So we are still subject, the community college is still subject to the 2011 Board of Trustees policy manual. So this predates the Board of Regents, but the Board of Regents adopted all of those policies. And so they are still in full force and effect unless and until they are overturned by the Board of Regents.
So I guess I'm trying to figure out, is this an administrative issue that when the system was created that nobody addressed sort of the change of the name? Or is you're saying you're still under the you know, sort of the direction of the policies that says Board of Trustees? Are the policies need to be updated, or are we just talking about name changes?
The policies themselves need to be updated. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And I see Karen has her hand up. If I'll pause there in case you want to call on
Okay,
her.
yes, because I don't see her, but Karen?
Yes, thank you very much. When the Board of Regents and the institutions were consolidated, the board did provide did take action to basically adopt all of the policies of the individual institutions. And so my understanding is that we're now looking at that holistically and looking at what needs to be changed and what can remain with the individual institutions.
Okay, thank you, Karen.
You're welcome.
If
Next
you can
slide,
move-
Cynthia.
Yeah, next slide, please. So one of the areas I wanted to talk about is compliance guidance from the Department of Justice. One of my favorite things as a former regulatory lawyer is to look on the Department of Justice and other federal regulatory agencies to see what they have insofar as press releases, as enforcement actions. They're quite active. But the good thing is that they have issued compliance guidance for different organizations to follow. So I wanted to take you through the highlights of their most recent guidance and what we at CT State are doing to adhere to that guidance. So the first one is risk associated with new and emerging technology. There's, everybody's talking about artificial intelligence, what's going on with it. And so at CT State, we have the AI Presidential Fellows Program. We have stakeholders from throughout CT State that participate in that program. I am a part of it, and I can tell you that our very first meeting, our moderator covered ethical considerations in AI, including privacy and accountability. So that was very reassuring for me. I feel like we are working towards being compliant with the Department of Justice guidance. The second point is incentivizing and protecting whistleblowers. I believe our civil rights folks here at CT State have done a tremendous job of making sure that people are aware of their whistleblower rights, of non-retaliation. There's also protection for people against retaliation outside of the world of civil rights. So anybody who reports ethical, illegal, unethical, illegal activity, they are subject to some protection. And I am going to be informing everybody as I do that training. I'm going to be informing everybody of their right. There is language in their new guidance about access to data and resources for compliance functions. So the federal government wants to ensure compliance offices have access to both data and resources. They would like programs to incorporate lessons learned. This is something that I have been doing in my ethics training. I have been incorporating lessons learned, whether from enforcement actions that we have had or frequently asked questions that we have received. We are incorporating that into our guidance going forward, and our different areas of compliance will be doing the same as well. And then finally, post-transaction compliance integration. They talk about mergers and acquisitions. And at CT State, as you know, we had the large consolidation. I want to give kudos to CFO Carrie Kelly and to President Maduco, because they were, as soon as CT State was created, their thinking was, let's create an office of compliance. And as I speak with colleagues from around the country, they're very impressed that that happened. Oftentimes, institutions do not create an office of compliance until they're fined by the federal government or ordered to do so by the federal government. So kudos to CT State. Next slide, please.
Can I ask a question before you go to the next slide? And this
Absolutely.
this may be a question to you, Cynthia, and to Cameron. We have a compliance officer at the system level. We have a compliance officer at Connecticut state level. And I realize your department is new. Do we have, or is there any thinking about ensuring that there's consistency across the system and that the compliance officers will either work together, regularly meet? Is it too early to even think about that? Just trying to get a perspective.
That's a great question. Cameron, do you want to speak to that?
Is Cameron still on? Well, I'm not
Cameron-
hearing. He may
Cameron
not.
has a new child, so he's on FMLA right now, and he may have
Okay, okay.
taken on his parental duties.
Okay. Well,
Well,
then we
yeah.
can
What I can
address
tell
that
you-
at a future meeting.
Yeah, what I can tell you, Regent, is that we have discussed policies. And so we are working in unison when it comes to policies. We have representatives from each and every one of the institutions on the policy committee. And so that's, we've had our first meeting and that was very positive. So, but yeah, I'll let Cameron at some later meeting discuss what things will look like.
Okay, thank you.
So training, one of the pillars of compliance is training, and we've actually done quite a bit of training since I've been here the last 9 months. We have had freedom of information training for over 70 CT state employees. We have had records management training for over 80 CT state employees. We've had ethics training for over 1,000 CT state employees. So what we did with ethics training was we originally brought out the Office of State Ethics to do training for President Maduko's cabinet and a few other sessions. And then, I felt comfortable enough. I was able to take it on my own. I've gone out to all 12 campuses. I've done training of the cabinets, of department chairs, of faculty, adjunct faculty. I was just at Capitol on Friday doing ethics training, and they were very engaged. You think this subject matter is super boring, but no, our faculty are incredibly engaged and they ask a lot of questions. So that's been very positive. Microlearning, we are working on a fun project, myself and our civil rights folks. We are working on creating training videos, just frequently asked questions or things that we see often. In the case of ethics, it'll be necessary expenses, gift giving between supervisors and subordinates. We're going to cover that in videos. And so going forward, we'll expand our library of videos and have more to share with our CT state community. We'll include quizzes down the line, but right now we're starting off with this project. Our Middlesex campus partners are being very helpful with this, so it's going to be fun. I hope to get those videos out to you when they're ready. And then finally, our Compliance Institute, that is our larger trainings that we do. We do 2 Compliance Institutes per year. They take about 3 days, actually. We cover a lot of Title IX. We cover a lot of civil rights matters. And it used to be led mostly by our civil rights folks. So that was the focus. Now that I've come on, we've expanded it. And so we've done other areas of compliance. Most recently, we covered FOI, records management, and our chief Chute also covered First Amendment auditors. So we plan to have another one sometime this summer. I would love to invite the members of this committee to come out and sit in for those trainings. Next slide. So another pillar of compliance is enforcement. We have had, since I've been here, over 5 compliance investigations. So investigations of cases of non-compliance. Usually when I step in is when other areas of the organization cannot address it. So it's not a labor matter. It's not a data privacy matter. Usually that's when I get involved. We have made referrals out to the Federal Department of Education, the State Auditors of Public Accounts, and the Connecticut State Police, amongst others. I work closely with our chief just to determine whether certain matters that we are looking into could have a criminal aspect to them. He does not have a detective, which is why we're referring things out to the Connecticut State Police if we need to. Next slide. So for this slide, I really appreciate Regent Port's comments about fiduciary responsibility. And I wanted to read you a passage from my Compliance 101, if you'll bear with me. It is important that the compliance officer have support from the governing body through their engagement and involvement in a board oversight committee. This committee's role is to understand and provide guidance on the compliance program efforts, ask appropriate questions related to management's ability to address and mitigate compliance risks, and assure that the compliance officer and the compliance program are adequately addressing areas of compliance risk for the organization. So with that, I just want to offer it up to this committee. You really should be driving this work and letting me know what you think should be done in terms of compliance at CT State. Happy to take any questions if you have any.
Elise, it's Rick.
Yeah, go ahead.
I want to say this really carefully. First of all, really good report. Thanks, Cynthia. With regard to the issue of minors on campus, high priority, something we really need to safeguard younger people on our campuses. I hope that as we address that issue, it doesn't diminish access of younger students to our various campuses and programs and so forth. Access is a super important part, I think, of our mission, and especially at CT State. So thank you for safeguarding the youngest people on our campuses, but hopefully this can be done in a way that doesn't diminish their access to all the opportunities that we can provide. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Cynthia, for your comprehensive overview of the new compliance office in CT State. And we're looking forward to hearing more about sort of how compliance will be handled across the system.
Madam Chair, that concludes our report to the Audit Committee.
Okay. Any other, Regent Porth? Any other questions, comments?
I appreciate everyone's work on this. A more complicated year, I think, in terms of what we needed to do. But overall, in my view, a good set of reports, and that's important. And I hope that we can convey that to the rest of the world, that we have worked hard on compliance and on the issues related to our audit. Thanks.
And Lloyd, and since Cameron's not on too, I also leave it to you and the team to ensure that that we sort of are consistent with our charter, that we sort of get regular updates and the progress toward, sort of, and Karen, this goes to you too, because I know you've been very involved in that, that we have an update and we come to a conclusion quickly on how we're going to address internal audits. That there were several questions that came up. I took lots of notes. There's several questions that came up during this session. And I want to make sure that we sort of stay on top of this. And I know that one of the things that you mentioned was the lack of talent in the organization when it comes to accountants. So we have to address that, because I think if nothing else, seeing the loss of the controller, and I'm delighted that we have a new controller, but the loss of a controller really put us in a very vulnerable position. And so we have to make sure that we don't face that again. So, and I thank everybody for all of your hard work. It's obvious that we've made some progress in a very, very short time frame, and hopefully we can continue to make progress. So with that, I'd like a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I second it. All in favor? Two of us.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you all, and thank you for all our guest speakers today and all of you that were on the call. I thought this was a good, very productive call. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everybody.
Chair.
Have a nice
Thank you,
day, everybody.
Regents.
Bye.
Take care.
Your live stream has stopped.